Hey peeps. So this week's episode is about how I came to anime and my top 10 favorites. So let's get into it. So my love of anime started very early on. Um, if you've been listening up to this point, then you know that my parents heavily regulated what we watched as kids. So we were kind of only regulated to, the kids' networks, cartoons and the like. And even some things then were still banned. Um, but we did get to watch Dragon Ball Z. I remember it vividly because sometimes it came on in the morning before school. And I would usually, if I could get everything I needed to get done in my morning routine, like get up, get washed up, get dressed, make sure my teeth was brushed and my hair was, you know, combed and all of these things. If I could get all of those things done on my own, I could sit and eat and watch Dragon Ball Z. Um, and so everybody at school at the time, I was living up north then, so it was really only me and my brother at the time. And I realized that I could rush through and get everything done because shortly after, the school was only on the next corner. We lived like on the side street, and you could see the school from my house. And then we would walk down and head to school. But Dragon Ball Z came on at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I could watch two episodes before heading out to elementary school. So shout out to that. Um, I don't think my parents thought that deeply about it, but I was all into Rock the Dragon. Um, and that was like my elementary life. We watched that in the morning, amongst other things like Ghost Rider. So whatever was on that channel, I watched it. Um, I just knew Gohan was going to be my my real life boyfriend. I don't know what kind of fantasy world I lived in as a kid because I swore up and down that these fictional characters were going to swoop in at any point and I was going to be a friend to them, a wife to them. Who knew? Um, but Gohan was the love of my life at the time, and I feel some type of way about how his character turned out. That is a story for another time. But when I moved down south and I had gotten a bit older, I think I was leaving middle school, going into high school. One of the things that we used to do was talk about Dragon Ball Z, and it would come on Toonami after school. So we always would discuss the episode from the night before. And by that time, Goku had died. He was being brought back to life by the Dragon Balls, and I was always intrigued as to how Bulma and Vegeta got together. And of course, they know that because Trunks came from the future and all of these things. So for me, Dragon Ball Z was always a pinnacle of my childhood, among other things that were other shows that were going on. Um, that is so why when Toriyama passed away, so many of my friends and family were heartbroken to hear that. For us, it was the baseline of everything that we do and know now. Um, so, RIP Toriyama. So that flows into my second biggest thing that took me over. It was definitely Bleach. Um, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on Bleach because I did a separate episode about that. So if you want to know more, please go and listen to that episode. But Bleach came around during a difficult time in my life. And for me, who hadn't watched Yu Yu Hakusho, Ichigo was a different type of MC at the time. A lot of the battle shonen that I watch, and I love battle shonen, has to do with kind of happy-go-lucky main characters. And so Bleach with Ichigo was the first time that I had seen a main character say, "Oh yeah, I don't really want to be bothered with this. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to be left alone. I just want to, be with my family and be left alone." And it intrigued me, especially since in the first episode, Rukia comes crawling through the window, believing that she can't be seen. And not only does he see her, but he kicks her. Um, so I had to stick around and figure out what that was going to be about. That was the biggest commitment that I had made up until that point, because even when I came along, I was watching it after it had went on hiatus. So I didn't start watching it till 2013. So shout out to all of the people that were watching it day to day and having to deal with filler. I did. I was able to skip and get back into the main story, although the filler is fantastic. I don't think I've seen an anime with better filler, but then that's a different discussion because most people don't want that. And then the 4 movies came out, which I thought were also great. So Bleach always gets high marks for me because it was there for me when I needed something. Always the two, Bleach and Justin Timberlake. So as a girly who loves a battle shonen, you can't mention battle shonen or even Bleach, the big three, which are Bleach, Naruto, and One Piece, without mentioning One Piece. Um, I don't think I ever thought to myself, how many episodes is this? A lot of people talk about that. Um, I don't think that's was as big of a deal for me because again, it was something I watched after Bleach. It was a sad time in my life for various reasons, and I needed something that was going to hold my attention and something that was going to hold my attention for a long period of time. Because again, I had gotten to the end of Bleach, which was 366 episodes, and thank God for the Thousand Year Blood War. But I mean, you know, let's get this let's get those episodes out. Let's churn them out. You know what I mean? But One Piece came along, and a lot of people will tell you, One Piece gets good at episode 200 or episode 300. I have to be one of the very few people that had the thought, like in the very first episode, where Shanks saves Luffy from the sea creature and, loses an arm, and he says, "Take my hat, when you become, the new king of the seas, then you can give me my straw hat back. I'll see you later," you know. And I remember thinking at that point, oh, I'm on this journey until I see that moment. And so that has not disappointed. I also started that in 2013, but it has been a good ride nonetheless. I've met some great people online and in my anime chats, talking about One Piece and different things. Um, I have a few favorite characters. They're pretty cliche, for a girl. Trafalgar Law, love that guy to death. The Dark Doctor, the Surgeon of Death. He has probably one of my favorite powers in regards to the things that he can do, the way he incorporates being a surgeon into, his fighting style and things like that. And he's unintentionally funny. I enjoy dry humor anyway, so there's that. Everybody loves Zoro. I mean, that goes without saying, right? But Sanji is actually my favorite. I tend to ignore people that are like, oh, well, he's, creepy or this or that, because I always feel like that is played up for, you know, laughs or whatever, but a lot of people in other countries don't think it's funny, so I just kind of move along. But his backstory, his dealings with his parents, the fact that he ended up with Zeph. I remember saying to my friend who introduced me to One Piece when the show first came on, and Sanji is introduced in the 20th episode, where they tell a backstory about how Zeph lost his leg, which is dramatically different in the anime if you watched it than it is in the manga. Um, but I remember thinking, he's coming to rob this cruise ship, and of all of these people that are on this cruise ship, Sanji is on it, and Sanji's like 8. Where the hell is his family? And I remember saying that to a friend of mine, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's no big deal." Um, and this was, of course, when there were only like 700 episodes or 600 episodes at the time, so he wouldn't have known anyway. But I always think it's funny because, Whole Cake Island came along and answered questions that I had had. But everybody in that show has a rough backstory, But I always loved me some Sanji, his fighting style, um, the way that he cooks for everybody, the way that he loves everybody, you know. And I will hear no slander on Sanji, you know. But the Straw Hat Crew is badass in general, so there's that. Um, a lot of his, a lot of Luffy's allies, they love him because he is about liberating people from the corrupt government for the price of a dinner. Um, and it's battle shonen. I can watch the same fight being drawn out for I don't know how long. I've been doing it for years, so that shonen technique doesn't bother me at all. Although, if you ask my sister, she got over that pretty quickly. So there's that. I was recommended Full Metal Alchemist by some friends of mine who don't do shonen, of all things, which is interesting. Um, and I remember they said, "You come over, we'll watch it together. It's only a handful of episodes. It's great." And I was like, "Okay, well, these people have never steered me wrong." It's very easy to recommend things for me because I go into it knowing that I'm going to enjoy it no matter what it is. So that's why it's so hard for me to write reviews or rate things because I'm probably going to enjoy it. That's how I am. So if you want a recommendation from me, like a real recommendation, I'm probably not the person. Like if you're overly critical, I can't help you. I don't know. But anyway, Danny and her husband, who you heard on the episode about us talking hockey, Danny and her husband were saying like, "Come over, we'll do like a movie night, quote unquote, and we'll watch Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood." I have to say that because I think I wore one of my Roy Mustang T-shirts to Second and Charles one time, and the guy asked me like, "Oh, did you watch Full Metal Alchemist?" And I was like, "Yeah, I watched Brotherhood. A friend of mine recommended it to me," and for some reason, he got really snarky. And for me, there was just no reason for that. But he basically was like, "Well, the original is the best," and I was like, "Well, isn't Brotherhood supposed to be closer to what she actually wrote in the manga?" "Yeah, but I mean, the original was better." And I said I would like to see it as she wrote it, though. You know, the same thing that people kept complaining about with Bleach and its fillers, but whatever. But he felt deeply about that for some reason. Anyway, Brotherhood is great. Um, I have a few characters that I think are spectacular, and just the story overall is interesting. Although maybe I have, aside from Bleach, maybe I have a thing with like watching anime that's about like foiling corrupt government and them doing unethical things. So I don't know, but um, we loved it so much that I had recommended it to my brothers and sisters who also loved it. Um, as I said, Roy Mustang is one of my favorite characters. I'm always gonna love the Flame Alchemist. Um, Edward and Winry and Alphonse. Um, that was that was a slow burn love story. I'm like, come on, you two, Ed and Winry, get it together. Um, I thought Scar was a 3 dimensional character. He had killed Winry's parents. Spoiler alert. Um, and he's a product of everything that took place in the war that happened. Because his family was killed, and those things, and just having to come together, overthrow a corrupt Fuhrer, and all of these things. So it's just great storytelling all the way around. Um, and the highlight of the fact that you cannot get something for nothing. So, you know, the Edward and Alphonse wanting to bring back their mother and thinking that they could just circumvent certain things is how Ed ends up with no arm and no leg. So it's just a great story. And even in the remake, or the what we call the Brotherhood treatment, is made a little bit better, if you ask me. But Full Metal Alchemist is on like anybody's list, right? So that shouldn't be shocking. Um, but two anime that came up that I really, really, really enjoyed that I didn't think I was going to enjoy was Assassination Classroom and Kuroko's Basketball. So I was not prepared. I don't even think I knew what Assassination Classroom was about. I'm one of those people that's pretty easygoing, as I've said, and I turned on. I think I watched it on Hulu of all places. I love the fact that you can now get at least certain basic anime most places, whether it be Hulu, Netflix, Bleach is on Disney, I guess, but um, wherever you're going, you can probably run into a handful of starter anime if you want to. Which I think is fantastic because growing up, it was very hard to try to find a place to watch these things. And as a kid, there was only so many stores I could drag my mother to. So the fact that they're, more accessible to people, I think is great. But anyway, Hulu recommended Assassination Classroom, and I went from the title. Like, this is it's gonna be interesting to see how this goes. I did not realize how much of an understatement that was because I did not realize that the story was going to center around a group of what's essentially middle school students, right? Um, Being segregated out because of different issues or whatever, or just flat out thinking that they're dumb, you know? And they're relegated to this patch of classrooms that aren't kept up, that aren't anything. They're class 1E. And they're just given, space over there to keep them away from the priority students that know how to ace a test. And not only that, but like they're being taught by this weird alien like creature. Um, and for some reason, my first question was, who employed this guy? you know, but the show is only 2 seasons. I actually went out and bought the box set of manga because at some point I'm going to go back and read it. But I did not think I was going to end up in tears at the end like I was because it was one of the few shows that told you in the beginning how the story was going to end, and in the end, you knew it was coming and still felt like, my goodness. But that first episode in that opening scene where he's trying to take roll call and they just pull out their assault weapons and they are trying to kill him. I was unprepared for that. And that was in like the first 30 seconds. I knew I was going to have to lock in. But the fact that he was one of the best teachers that they had, the fact that he understood people's different shortcomings and how he was helping them do different things on top of teaching them the technique of assassination and being more confident in themselves. I don't think I've seen anything like it, and I don't think I've seen anything since. So that was fantastic. But I think the final roll call did me in because, again, we knew how the story was going to end. We knew that they had until the end of the year to kill the teacher. You find out different things as to why that's true. Um, but for some reason, I got allowed myself to believe that it was not going to happen, that they were going to be with the teacher always. But in the end, they were going to high school anyway. So, you know, but my sister and I, we cried real tears. It was a big deal. So, yes, I recommend Assassination Classroom to anyone. Next up would be Food Wars. And just like how I deal with Sanji, I kind of ignore their random outbursts when they taste food. But the overall story with Soma and understanding who his father really was and just the whole dynamic between, him and his father and, not wanting to lose the restaurant and his father just closing up shop and traveling and letting Soma figure out things on his own. I was not prepared. But one thing you need to know about me is I am a huge Food Network fan. If there is a cooking competition, I am with it. Okay? Guys Grocery Games, Beat Bobby Flay, um, Iron Chef, the Tournament of Champions, Alex versus America, anything that had a, you know, competition base to it plus cooking, I was in on that, okay? And so I was not prepared, even though the title really does tell you it, Food Wars. I was not prepared for it to be that kind of realm of anime. So, Soma being unconventional in the way that he tries things and experiments with things, and then coming to rest on or clash with students who had a very traditional upbringing, you know, and them having the most to say about, his father owning just a small cafe and all of these things, blah, blah, blah. I thought it was fantastic. I was so sad when the last season or series came out because for me it was the end of an era. That was another thing that was recommended to me by my anime friends on Twitter, and again they knocked it out the park. So it's an anime that I'm always going to incorporate in my recommendations. Um, Sometimes the visual effects are a little too much when they like the food and all of that, but I love it nonetheless, although I get people's complaints about it. So that brings me to My Hero Academia. Now, My Hero is a typical battle shonen, but there was a lot of critique when it first came out about how it wasn't a likable show, about how Midoriya wasn't a likable enough MC. Um, and I think it's weird. They're like freshmen at a high school. So I wondered how people wanted him to act or whatever. But there was something triggering about a child that was in touch with his emotions that rubbed people the wrong way. However, I loved it. So there's that. Um, a boy who lives in a world where everybody else has a power but him and having to adapt to that world, and just being bullied in general, you know. I think I identified with that because most of my time in both middle school and high school was spent being bullied, and it really struck a chord with me. But overall, the overarching story, especially what we learn in the first couple of seasons, is that, everybody has a dream. You're given a dream when you're younger, but there is a difference between having a dream and then going through the process of executing it. You know, it was the process of trying to get into school, taking the entrance exam and possibly being killed, you know, the different facets of being a hero because everybody's hero work doesn't look the same. There's some in search and rescue, and there's some in different things. It's not always about battling bad guys. Um, Bad guys are not like what you see them on TV. At the end of the first season, when they come and they infiltrate the school and they are prepared to hurt and kill his classmates, it was very eye opening. When he speaks to, when Midoriya speaks to All Might and he talks about the injury that he has and what it has cost him. And they have that conversation in the beginning where he's told, like, you really need to think through if this is what you want to do. There's other ways to help people. You could become a police officer. You could do different things. I think it was very, I think it was a very good way of showing people, especially children, it's great to have dreams, but at some point we have to be realistic about what those dreams are and if that's something you still want to do once you figure out what it takes to achieve these dreams. Add that to the fact that here's a boy who's entering high school with kids who've had these powers since they were 4. I think that's the age that the powers start showing up. They've been able to cultivate and do different things with said powers that they've had since they were 4 or 5. So he's having to regulate this power that he just got versus people that have had it for at least a decade now. So his ingenuity as to studying other people and their quirks, I just thought it was a great story to tell. And of course, you had like a dynamic cast because there were other people whose stories overlapped his, and how these stories come together. I think it was an intricate way to tell a story. And as a writer, that's also something that I'm looking for or looking into, how to tell a layered story with many characters. That is always going to get it a spot on my countdown. And I try not to pay attention to how people react on the internet or how, the Twitter bots or in the Twitterverse go, because it's just kind of an echo chamber of people being weird, which sometimes takes away from the work itself. But My Hero Academia is great battle shonen storytelling, right up my alley. So that's always going to be something that I enjoy. So I think I forgot to go over Kuroko's basketball. I know I mentioned it with Assassination Classroom as one of those things that I was not prepared to like. It was recommended to me by another friend on Twitter, and she kept saying to the group of us, like, we need to watch this. And I remember thinking to myself, this is, basketball is not really one of my favorite sports. I can watch it, and I've gotten a bit more into that, but I was never into watching sports anime, right? So when she recommended it, I was very, very skeptical. But I turned it on. I found it on Netflix, and I started watching it, about the generation of miracles, how this really stacked middle school team had these 5 members that did really well. But there was this Phantom Six man and what he brought to the table. But it's told in flashbacks, actually, more or less. And then you start wondering, what is it that this 6 man brought to the table that the rest of them don't, And it is a very, very layered story about whether or not there's more to sport than just talent. And do people who just love the game and have a love for the game? Do they have a position in the sport, even if they're not as talented? So that brings us to Kuroko, um, who, when they figure out was on the team with the Generation of Miracles, is like, oh, we're going to put him on this high school team. It's going to be great. And then you realize that he's not a shooter. He's barely a runner. What does he do? And how could he have kept up with this Generation of Miracles? And it's a big deal because there's going to be a lot of high school tournaments where the five guys who made up the Generation of Miracles will not be playing together. They all went to separate high schools, and it is about seeing who is the best. Um, so let me tell you, Daiki was a beast. And for the life of me, I can't figure out which basketball player he is modeled after, but he was unstoppable. And when they first lose to him, and he talks about, like, you may have beat, you know, Glasses Midorima, um, who can shoot threes from any fucking where. He's very much a Steph Curry, who could get a shot off from anywhere. But you can't beat me. The only person who could beat me is me. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. And they're doing everything that they can to beat him. And poor Kagami, um, Kuroko sold him this dream about how the two of them together are going to be, great, a great pair. And, Daiki is the first person to point out, you think you're the first person that he was um, paired with? You think you're better than me? He got a knockoff version of me, and he thinks he can beat me with you. That's not going to happen. Um, all of the voice acting was great. All of my favorite Japanese voice actors were in it. It's like they all converged together, which I thought was fantastic. Um, but Kisei was actually my favorite character. I think behind Taiga, behind Daiki, um, Kisei was actually my number one. Maybe I have a thing for blonde anime characters. I don't know. Sanji, Kisei, I don't know. But Kisei's ability to mimic anything that he sees, having only seen it once, was fantastically frustrating. And the fact that he could mimic any of the Generation of Miracles was also ridiculous. Sadly, though, I think he got a bad rep because him and Daiki kept going at it. And I wanted him to win, but, his damn ankle and all of these things. But sadly, I was in it for the long haul. Saren was a team made up of real players, though. They may not have been the Generation of Miracles, but they were a dynamic team on their own, especially when they got back Tepe. They had a real center. They had other players that were able to carry the team. Their point guard, uh, Hugo, who was a shooter who knew how to rain down threes if he could concentrate on it. They really were people who enjoyed the game for the game, you know. And Tyga had to figure out how to enjoy the game for the game. And once he figures that out and he's able to pull everybody into the zone, it was a sight to be seen. I did not think that there were 75, 76 episodes somewhere in there and a movie. Let me tell you, I don't think I've ever felt anger than when I watched that movie and the people were just being disrespected. The kids were just being disrespected. So I'm not going to comment much on the fact that the Generation of Miracles had to come back and defend their title and defend their people. But just know that the movie was epic, and that antagonist deserve everything he got. He running around spitting on people. I'll never forget it. But just the movie and the show being about what it was, and then them realizing, like, at the end of the day, we're all going to go our separate ways, and this is going to be, just part of our past where it intersects. Because again, they're in high school or they're freshmen in high school. Um, so just knowing that that was a battle, and, Kuroko is able to learn different things about playing basketball, learn different skills too. So, and I think a lot of them also figured out that basketball for them was a tool, and they're able to do things and actually have fun. So I very much enjoyed that. So that's always on my list of recommendations, although a lot of people don't watch sports anime. That would have been the one to get me into sports anime, though. So, last two, we're going to go with Demon Slayer, which for me is a lot like Bleach. But I could not believe, um, that the first episode started out that way. That man went down the mountain to sell things for his family. I think it was firewood, if I remember correctly. To sell for his family, only to come back and they're all killed by demons. And I mean, like, he has to walk through the house and see what was done. It was ridiculous. Um, it was a lot to go down and do things for your family, especially after your father has passed away and come back and all of your siblings and your mother are killed. So it's just you in the beginning, or who you think is just you. Then he finds his sister is still alive, but she's been turned into a demon. And the whole process is about figuring out if he can turn her back to her old self. He has to be trained. The I remember this was something that was recommended because my siblings had started watching anime again, and they picked up watching Demon Slayer. Um, the difference between me and them is that I usually watch things um, subtitled because I don't feel like waiting. That's just it. I'm not all that patient, but they watch things dubbed, and that's fine. The problem is that the schedule for things being dubbed is a bit longer than I'm willing to wait. So I jumped in and was able to watch a couple more seasons than they were because they were waiting for things to be dubbed, which is fine. Um, but the scene where they have to be trained by the old man and he's got to take the test on the mountain, and he meets, all of these different people, and he is trained by these two young children, or who he thinks are young children, only to find out that they lost their lives on the mountain, and did not pass the test. That was too much for me, and I think that's still like in the first season. So it was a lot. I can see a lot of similarity. There are people that made comparisons online between Bleach and Demon Slayer. And I know that both the creator of My Hero and Demon Slayer had said that Kubo and Bleach was a source of inspiration for them, but you could really see it in Demon Slayer, which is probably why it speaks to me. But going on this quest for the sole purpose of your little sister, who everyone is saying is kind of a lost cause, like the prevailing opinion is that they should just kill her. There's no way to turn people back from being bitten or clawed or whatever by demons. So they think he's embarking on an impossible mission. Um, and every battle is worse and worse every time. And he's doing everything that he can to learn more and more things. But as he goes into the realm of, you know, more and more demons trying to get to the person who had his family killed. Um, Things become harder and harder. Um, the Mugen Train, I know it was a movie, but they also set the episodes out and we were able to watch that. I remember thinking, this is an epic, epic story. It's written really well. And the way that this demon was putting everybody to sleep on the train and he's having to figure out what's actually real and what isn't. How does he get out of the dream? He keeps having to cut his own throat. It was just so dynamically written and animated well, action wise, that I could not look away. Um, but in the way that I do things, I've kind of um, do things in moods, so I have to get back into that. But it is still on my list of things that I recommend to other people. I was not prepared for how well that first episode really went. So there's that. And I think that the last one that I have here on my list is Noragami. That was something that was, again, recommended to me by, you know, friends on Twitter. And shout out to those friends because they had a great list of things that I probably would not have watched had they not told me. Um, but Noragami was a show that was 2 seasons. And reading it has been an even better experience because there's certain things that happen in anime that don't happen in the manga and vice versa. So, but I can't imagine the idea coming to you that there is a set of gods that they pray to for, great things, for whatever, luck, fortune, whatever. But it doesn't occur to people that there are bad things that people want to happen, and there are lower gods that people pray bad things to, wish death or to, misfortune to befall certain people, and that's who Yato is, the stray god of calamity who wants to rebuild his image and become one of the, more popular, more known gods. And it is like when you see, how he's tried to reinvent himself so that he's not forgotten by people. Because what the story that he tells is that once people get what they want from him, they don't remember him anymore. And I remember seeing a particular scene where somebody comes to him and says, like, this person got away with murdering my child. I really want you to do him in, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. And he does it. And then that person forgets about him, So he lives in fear of disappearing completely if everybody in the world forgets him. So him being born from a wish, like most gods in the series, but he sprouted from his father's wish to kill every god in existence. And he basically is chained to his father to do evil deeds. Um, you know, he's afraid to separate from his father, being the only person that doesn't forget him or who he is, or, that he's born. So his existence is tied to his father. Um, he's introduced to Nora. She becomes his weapon, and together they just kind of go out and, kill people indiscriminately under his father's orders. So, you know, that's an interesting story from a from a entity that wants to change, from being about killing and destruction and calamity, which is in his name, the god of calamity, to wanting to help other people. That's a dramatic 180, and his father is not having it. And Nora doesn't even seem to want to let him go. It's weird. But he ends up meeting Hiyori. she is just like in Bleach. She is one of the characters that can see him clearly, you know. So he walks out in front of a bus, and she does everything she can to save him from being killed, but he's not alive, so it was a waste of time, you know. And her life is thrown upside down from meeting him, being with him, you know. And she's the other person that remembers him. And there are other gods in the series that, he interacts with and different things. But the relationship between him being like 2,000 years old in like an 18, 19-year old's body, and then Hiyori being 16 and trying to tag along. And then somewhere in his mind, he knows it's better for her to go on about her business on her own and forget all about him. But he also doesn't want her to forget anything about him. So it's an interesting story that I think came to a conclusion when the writers put out the final, manga. And I'm having to deal with that because I have to go in and read all about that. But I feel some type of way. But the anime was fantastic. I do think there needs to be another season. There needs to be a season 3 to go over everything that has happened in the manga you know, since the end of season 2. But, if it's left up to me, all of these stories would be as long as possible. Everything needs to go on for 20 years for my entertainment, okay? Just like One Piece. So, um, yeah, these are my top 10 in no particular order, except for Bleach being number 1, because it's always going to be my favorite. Those were a few of my favorite characters. Um, and maybe next week I'll do a list of just favorite characters from every anime that I've seen. But that's all I have for now, peeps, and I will talk to y'all later.